Metro Exodus is a post-apocalyptic FPS shooter developed by 4A Games and released in 2019. It mostly abandons the setting of the previous games by climbing out of the dirty metros of Moscow and releasing you into the less than inhospitable Russian wasteland, made up of a few semi-open world levels filled with enemies, intrigue, and catfish, in search of a place to call home. It's also one of my favorite games. I first played Metro Exodus back when it released, and it left quite the impression on me, that being that it was basically perfect. To me, it's one of those games where once you finish your first playthrough, you just kinda sit back and take a moment to think about what it was you just experienced. That way of thinking changed when I saw Metro Exodus on sale while browsing Steam, and decided I wanted to go through and play it again on a stream. In which time, I lost half of the footage, which made me sad. I booted it up, started playing, and, well, something felt different. Worse, even. There was something about the playthrough that just bugged me. Now, that's not to say I stopped liking Metro Exodus, because I didn't. It's still easily one of my personal favorite games, and I feel most of the praise it gets is warranted. For one, it's gorgeous, and probably one of the most immersive gaming experiences out there. There's no active HUD, with most of the important things instead being displayed on devices mounted to your wrist in the form of a watch, a compass, a Geiger counter, and some other stuff. The map for each area is shown on a notebook with your objectives being written on the back. And you carry around a backpack that doubles as a portable crafting and weapon modification table. Also, the graphics are amazing. I haven't played the Enhanced Edition because my PC almost exploded from playing the normal one, but I've heard it's a step up from the graphics in the base game that you're looking at right now, which is honestly insane. Then you have the story, which honestly is one of my personal favorites in gaming. The way that the characters interact with each other, the world, just the general environment that they're in, and the way that the story flows, it just feels good, at least to me personally. Even some of the bullet sponges scattered across the different semi-open world levels tend to have at least a hint of personality when they're not taking a shotgun shell to the face.
Soul may not be completely lost.
And all of this extends to the DLC too, especially 2 Kernels, which, while short, is worth it for the narrative alone. I just really enjoyed the story, despite how much it differed from the previous games and the fact that it's a lot more front and center for this one. It's just a great experience for those looking to get a more serious, realistic look at a nuclear post-apocalypse. One thing I also enjoyed was the gameplay. I have seen people complain that it's too sluggish, which I can see compared to other FPS games like Call of Duty, especially when I was playing with a controller. At the same time, it kinda makes sense considering the amount of gear you're carrying around at any given time. You're wearing full body armor, a backpack that is not only full of scraps, but also doubles as a portable crafting table, and you can have up to 3 weapons on you at once with the ammo for all of them, and half the time you're wearing a gas mask or carrying it around, which would reduce visibility at least a little bit. More than anything, I think it's just realistic, though it can definitely be jarring to people more familiar with mainline FPS games. That being said, there are some negative aspects about the gameplay for me. A lot of the times, at least in normal difficulty, the AI came off as being dumb as rocks. Now, you could say this is also realistic, but the other half of the time, they're omnipotent gods who can snipe you from a mile away behind cover with an AK-47. Oh, and by the way, the humanimals are fucking stupid. Not an actual point, but I wanted to mention it because they take so many bullets you'd think they were eating them for breakfast. Nah, actually I hate whatever these things are even more. Googly-eyed, mouth having. While some of it made me a bit upset at times, it didn't bother me as much as the fact that this game, which just so happens to be a post-apocalyptic FPS shooter, encourages you to shoot as little as possible. Even in normal mode, ammo is an incredibly scarce resource, and enemies generally aren't. It makes sense for resources to be scarce, sure, but it encourages you to avoid combat entirely, instead opting for stealth where you can knock your enemies out or put a knife through their chest from cover. Honestly, you're better off doing that most of the time. Not just because of the fact that even on normal mode you will constantly be low on ammo if you haven't been continually and meticulously searching every nook and cranny of everywhere for supplies, but also because the ending of the game is based on a binary morality system that essentially says kill equals bad and stealth equals good. I still managed to enjoy it despite this, though I feel they could have benefited from some sort of melee combat. Could have made it a little bit more reasonable from a gameplay perspective, especially considering there are times where the human enemies you're fighting actually have their own melee weapons. And I don't think it would make it easier either, especially if you added a durability system similar to how your weapon cleaning works. Another thing I don't like is the way the game handles saves, which is basically that it just doesn't. You get quick saves, which is better than the last game, because they didn't even have that. But you better hope you quick save in a good place, because the game will then auto-save you somewhere you don't want to be, and you will cry yourself to sleep if you don't have a backup ready. You have a limited number of save slots, and the autosave itself is pretty inconsistent, and has gotten me stuck a few times. There's also the issue of voice acting, which really isn't that big of a deal, but to put it simply, the English voice acting in the game is not good. It's not terrible either, but certain lines can come off as cringy, though I've heard the Russian voice acting is actually really good. I wouldn't know, I don't speak Russian. In all honesty, the quality of the voice acting doesn't get on my nerves nearly as much as the decision to make Artyom a silent protagonist. I know this isn't exclusive to Metro Exodus, so I'm giving it a slight pass in that regard. Throughout all 3 of the Metro games, Artyom is a silent protagonist. He doesn't say anything at all when the player is in control. Typically, a silent protagonist is used to allow the player to encompass the character. They're usually a blank slate with little known about them, because you're supposed to decide who they are through playing the game. This isn't the case with Artyom. He has thoughts, feelings, and goals that we know about from playing these games and interacting with the characters. And he does talk. In between chapters on loading screens, Artyom will read an excerpt from his diary relating to the current chapter of the game, or the chapter that you're about to play. It's a way to fill the silence. It breaks immersion for me personally, because then there will be some absolute shit going down, and Artyom's friends are on the radio trying to get information from him, or trying to find out if he's even alive, and I'm just supposed to assume this guy is so dedicated to not saying a single word outside of reading his diary that he won't even speak to his friends, his father-in-law, or even his own wife? Hey Artyom, I'm currently banging your wife. Got any tips for me? Hehehe. You always were a good pal. In the other games, Artyom was rarely in a position to speak back to people, but I think it's a bad design choice for Exodus, because there are several moments where Artyom is part of a larger conversation with one or multiple other people, and having that dialogue would have improved the game for me. Regardless of my complaints about the game, I do genuinely consider Metro Exodus to be one of my favorite games. I think the reason I kind of focused on the negatives in this video is because it relied on me going back to play it and realizing I didn't like it as much as I used to, even though it had only been a year or two. That being said, I did find this pseudo-experiment pretty interesting, and honestly, it makes me want to go back to play games that I hold in pretty high regard to see how my perspective on them has changed. After all, nothing's perfect, not even Metro Exodus. For anyone who got this far, thanks for watching. I'm still not entirely sure how all this works. I don't expect to make it big, this is sort of just a hobby whenever I have the chance. But this is my first proper video. I would appreciate any suggestions in the comments or anywhere, and anyway, I hope you all enjoyed. See ya.